This video was made for educational purposes only. In August of 2013, Mike and Karen Laspisa helped their only son Bryce pack his things into the family vehicle because summer break had just ended, and Bryce had to go back to school. Bryce attended Sierra College in Rocklin, California, where he was about to begin his sophomore year. Once he got everything packed and put in the car, his mom and dad got in their car and began their 7-hour drive. Once Mike and Karen got their son back to his apartment on campus, they exchanged farewells and some hugs, wished him the best and headed back south to their family home. On their way back home, Mike and Karen couldn't help but to talk about how proud of their son they were because of how well he had been doing in school and how well he was managing living on his own. As far as they knew, he absolutely loved school and loved his graphic design program he'd been attending. He seemed to also be doing well socially because he had plenty of friends and had an amazing girlfriend that seemed to be making him extremely happy. So, as far as his parents knew, Bryce was truly living life to the fullest and was undoubtedly on the right path. But just a couple of days after arriving back at school, Sean, who happened to be his best friend and roommate, and his girlfriend Kim, had noticed he was acting erratically. It's said that at the time Bryce was drinking lots of hard liquor. Bryce was your average college student, and he liked to go out to parties and drink socially. But this was not that. The amount of alcohol Bryce was consuming around this time was quite alarming. And on top of the heavy amounts of alcohol, Bryce had been taking a substance called Vyvanse. Vyvanse is a stimulant that's given to people that suffer from ADHD. But Bryce did not suffer from ADHD. Instead, Bryce did it for the feeling and to stay up all night playing video games. But between staying up all night playing games, the constant drinking, along with the use of drugs, Bryce began to act out of character. He was starting to become extremely paranoid and anxious. Sean and Kim would quickly decide to confront Bryce about his obvious addiction and ask him flat out, like, "Hey man, are you okay? Why are you doing this to yourself? What is going on with you?" And Bryce would say, "No guys, I'm fine. I'm just drinking and doing what I want. It's not a big deal. Don't worry guys, everything is okay." But Sean and Kim knew everything was not fine. They thought that something had to be going on with Bryce for him to be doing drugs and drinking the way he was. They just didn't know what. Then, on August the 28th, 2 weeks after Bryce arrived back to school, Sean and Bryce were at their apartment hanging out alone, just sitting around, when Bryce randomly pulls his earring out of his ears, which happened to be a pair of genuine diamonds, and hands them over to Sean, telling him that he wants him to keep them. Looking at the earrings, Sean says, "No, didn't your mom give you these? These gotta be important to you, and besides they have to be pretty expensive." That's when Bryce looks at Sean with a serious face, and says to him, "No, for real, take them, really, I want you to have them." Sean's looking at the earrings wondering what's going on, but before he can refuse the item once more, Bryce then lays his Xbox down on the table and says, "I want you to have this too, take my Xbox," and Sean says, "No way, I can't accept either of these gifts, like really, what is going on with you?" Then Bryce said, "Look, I just want you to have them. I don't need them no more, and you're my best friend, so just take them." As Sean sat there taking the situation in, and thinking on how to handle it, he noticed Bryce take out his phone and start to text someone very aggressively, like he was upset. Then, after a while, Bryce looks up from his phone and he tells Sean, "Hey, just so you know, I broke up with Kim." At this point, Sean begins to realize that something is definitely wrong with this situation. Because there's no reason why Bryce would just break up with Kim. They were so in love and got along so well. They also never got into fights or showed any signs of breaking up. Plus they had just seen each other earlier in the day and everything seemed to be just fine between the couple. But now Bryce is breaking up with her by text. That didn't make any sense. Plus he is trying to give Sean all these valuable things and it just isn't adding up. So Sean, not knowing what else to do, waited for Bryce to leave to go talk to Kim, to call Bryce's mom to let her know what was going on with her son. So, once on the phone with Karen, he let her know that Bryce has been using drugs and drinking a lot, and now he was acting strange, trying to give away all of his stuff. And he reassured her that he was genuinely worried about him and that he wouldn't be doing this if he didn't think there wasn't a real problem. Like, I'm not trying to get him in any trouble, I just called to see if you could reach out to him because I'm really worried about him. Karen was very alarmed by what Sean was telling her, because she didn't have any idea that this was going on. So, she told Sean she was going to have a talk with Bryce, thanked him for calling and telling her, then she hung up the phone. After getting off the phone with Sean, she dialed her son's phone number and tried giving him a call. But before the phone call went through, her phone actually started to ring. It was Bryce. Karen immediately answered the phone, expecting it to be Bryce on the other end, but instead it was Kim. And Kim would go on to explain, like, hey Karen, I'm sorry to have to call you like this, but your son had just showed up to my apartment acting very off, so I took his keys because I don't think he's safe to be driving. I can't put my figure on it, but he is definitely not himself. He's acting so strange and out of character that I didn't know what else to do, so I called you. And Kim would go on to explain, like, hey Karen, I'm sorry to have to call you like this, but your son had just showed up to my apartment acting very off, so I took his keys because I don't think he's safe to be driving. I can't put my finger on it, but he is definitely not himself. He's acting so strange and out of character that I didn't know what else to do, so I called you. If Karen wasn't concerned before, she was now. So Karen asks Kim if she can speak to her son. Kim said, yeah, hold on, he's right here. Bryce gets on the phone, and immediately says, hey mom, how are you, while sounding surprisingly normal. So she asks him, hey, what's going on with you? I keep hearing that you're drinking, doing drugs, and acting strangely. He said, listen mom, I promise I'm not on drugs. Me and Kim had just broken up, and it ended pretty messy, and all I want to do is leave and go home, but I can't because she has my keys, so will you please tell her to give me my keys so I can go home? But Karen wasn't really buying her son's story. She knew her son like the back of her hand and found it utterly strange that his girlfriend and his best friend would say the same exact thing. So Karen said, you know what Bryce, I want you to stay there and I'm going to fly out there first thing in the morning and see what's going on with you and we'll go from there. But Bryce totally disagrees and says, no mom, I have so much to talk to you about, and until I do I don't want you coming out here. So Karen says, what do you mean you have a lot to talk to me about? Like, what is it that you have to talk with me about? I don't understand what you mean. But Bryce refused to answer her or talk with her about it over the phone. Bryce being so cryptic kinda worried Karen. And the reason being Karen found this extremely troubling, was because up until this point, Bryce was always very comfortable talking to his parents about anything and didn't really keep secrets from them. So for Bryce to not tell his mom what was going on was pretty odd, she thought. So Karen gave up trying to get Bryce to tell her and put her husband on the phone, and he said, hey Bryce, what's going on, are you okay? Your mom is telling me there's some problem. What's going on here? Bryce again says, look dad, me and my girlfriend just broke up, it got messy and she's refusing to give me my keys so I can leave. I just want her to give me my keys so I can go. Around 1 a.m., Karen received a call from Bryce letting her know that he had made it to his apartment and that he was safe. Karen was totally relieved and said, okay, please just stay home and get some sleep and I'll talk to you in the morning. Bryce said, okay mom, and they hung up the phone and Karen and Mike went to bed. So the next morning, on August the 29th, at 11 a.m., Karen received an automated phone call from her car insurance stating that roadside assistance had been used on their 2003 Toyota Highlander, which happened to be Bryce's car. This confused Karen because that last time she talked to Bryce, he was at home safe. But now she's thinking like, did he get up early in the morning and end up in an accident? Or is it possible he had car trouble on his way home last night and just didn't tell me? So she immediately called Bryce, but to no avail, he didn't answer the phone. So then Karen called Sean and Sean did answer the phone, and Karen said, hey, do you mind putting Bryce on the phone? And what Sean said would shock Karen to her core. After asking Sean if he could please put Bryce on the phone, Sean would go on to tell Karen no, because Bryce isn't home right now. And matter of fact, he never came home last night. I haven't seen Bryce since he left to go to Kim's place yesterday. Due to how strange their son has been acting the past couple of days definitely made Karen and Mike feel uneasy about their son's recent disappearance. Their first thought was to call the police, but then they didn't want to overreact, so instead, Karen and Mike began brainstorming ideas on how to find their son. And soon after they thought it would be a good idea to check his bank statements, because they recently gave him a new credit card that they can easily check the transactions on to see if there had been any recent purchases that they can use to try and pinpoint a roundabout location of where he may be. So they check his transaction history, and his most recent transaction was in Buttonwillow, California, at a car repair shop earlier that same day. Buttonwillow is a tiny desert town right off the I-5 highway that was about halfway from his parents' home to his college campus. After seeing this, Karen and Mike quickly came to the conclusion that Bryce must have been taking the journey home from school when he experienced car trouble. They figured when they talked to him last night, instead of driving to his apartment like he said he was, he just started the long journey home and didn't mention it because he didn't want to worry them. He did mention he had a lot to tell them that he didn't want to talk about over the phone, so this made sense to Karen and Mike. Karen came up with the idea to contact the car garage to see why Bryce had used their garage. So Karen calls and a guy named Christian answers the phone. And Karen tells Christian that she's looking for her missing son, and asked him if he remembered waiting on him, so she gave him a description of a young man with orange hair and an arm tattoo that was driving a 2003 Toyota Highlander. And immediately, Christian said, "Yes, actually I do, he was in here just a few hours ago." We answered his roadside assistance call. He had ran out of gas on the side of the I-5 highway, so we met him at a nearby rest stop and brought him some gas. Then Karen asked, did he happen to say where he was heading by chance? He said no, but if you want I can head back to the rest stop and see if he's still there. It's only about 10 minutes down the road. I doubt he's still there cause it's been a couple hours, but I'd be happy to go check for you. And Karen and Mike said, "Oh, that would be wonderful, thank you so much." So Christian hopped in his car and drove over to the Buttonwillow rest stop, which was about 10 minutes away. He wasn't really expecting Bryce to still be there since it's been a little over 3 hours, but to his surprise when he pulled into the parking lot he seen Bryce parked in his Toyota Highlander just sitting there staring out the front windshield watching traffic like he was in some kind of trance. Christian walked up and knocked on Bryce's window, and when he did Bryce seemed to snap out of it. Bryce rolled down his window and Christian explained, like, "Hey man, your parents are worried sick about you, you really need to talk to them so they know you're okay." And as he's saying this he actually has his phone out and calls Karen. She answers and Christian says, "Hey, he's still here, here he is," and he goes ahead and hands Bryce the phone. Bryce takes the phone and says hello. Karen replies, "Bryce, what are you doing? What are you doing just sitting at a rest stop in Buttonwillow while everyone is worried sick looking for you? Like really, what is going on with you?" And Bryce wouldn't have much of an answer, nor would he have much to say. He just kept saying, "I'm not doing anything, I'm just sitting here," sounding somewhat confused. So after going in circles and getting absolutely nowhere, Karen would just tell him, "Okay, well, fill your car up with gas, and leave there, and come straight home now please." And Bryce agrees, and says, "Okay mom, yeah that's fine, okay, I'm coming now." So, Bryce tells his mom bye, and gives the phone back to Christian, and Christian puts the phone to his ear, and says, "Okay Karen, it looks like Bryce is going to be leaving, so I'm going to leave, and head back to the shop myself." Karen thanks him again, and says goodbye, and they hang up the phone. Christian then gets back in his car, and as he's leaving and driving out of the parking lot, he looks over in Bryce's direction and it seems like Bryce isn't getting ready to leave. It actually looks like Bryce went back to staring blankly out into the distance. But Christian thought to himself, you know, he just talked to his mom, and told her he was going to be heading home, so, I bet that's exactly what he's going to do. From Buttonwillow, California to Bryce's parents' house is about a 3-hour drive. So Karen and Mike were expecting their son to arrive home by 3 p.m. that same day. So by the time it hit 3:30 Karen started to call Bryce's phone to check and see where he was. But no matter how many times she called she wouldn't get an answer. At first they thought maybe he got stuck in traffic or something, but as more and more time passed they realized something was very off with their son and his behavior. And after giving him the benefit of the doubt, and waited around until about 6 p.m., they finally had enough, and called the police, and filed a missing persons report. The first thing police did was contact AT&T to get a location on his phone. And once they got his location, his parents and police were both stunned. because it was showing that he was still in Buttonwillow, California, located in a hotel parking lot just a few lots down from the rest stop that Christian found him sitting in hours before. So, the police in Buttonwillow were notified that Bryce was a missing person, and police headed over to the hotel parking lot to see if he was there. When police arrived at the hotel, sure enough, so was the 2003 Toyota Highlander with Bryce sitting in the driver's seat staring forward with a blank stare. So an officer knocks on his window and Bryce rolls it down, and the officer began questioning him. The officer would go on to ask Bryce what he was doing and let him know that his parents were worried sick about him. The officer would later say that Bryce seemed totally lucid and sober. He said that Bryce told him he wasn't on any kind of drugs, and he even let the police search his car, and he also passed the field sobriety tests that police performed on him that night. And the officer also said when he asked Bryce what he was doing, that Bryce really didn't have an answer other than he told him he was just sitting there, and that he was planning on leaving and heading home soon. But, before the officer left, he told Bryce to call home to let his parents know he was alright, and to let them know he was heading home, but, as soon as he told him that, Bryce became very apprehensive, like he really didn't want to call home, and the officer noticed it. But, the officer said, "Hey, you have to call home and talk to your parents, they're very worried about it and they're the reason we're out here right now. So get out your phone right now and call your mom and dad." And after a couple seconds Bryce reluctantly pulled out his phone and dialed his mom and hit call, and as soon as he did the officer said, "Give me the phone," so Bryce handed him the phone. Karen answered, and the officer said, "Hey, look, I'm here with your son now. He seems fine, he's sober, there's no drugs or alcohol. I don't really know what he's doing, but he says he's going to be going home soon, but there's nothing wrong with the situation as far as I can tell, but you need to talk to your son and figure out what's going on." After that, he hands Bryce back his phone, and Bryce puts the phone to his ear and Karen says to him in an upset tone, "What are you doing? Why are you still in Buttonwillow? You've been sitting there for 9 hours, what is going on with you?" And, Bryce really didn't have an answer for any of the questions, he just pretty much deflected all of them and just continued to say he would be on his way home very soon and not to worry, that everything was fine. Karen, realizing that she wasn't getting anywhere, decided to switch her tactic and calm down, and said, "Listen, Bryce, you need to go get something to eat, maybe some coffee, and then you need to drive straight home. And, whatever is going on, whatever is bothering you, we can talk about it and figure it out. But first, you need to come home, please just come home." "Okay, you're right, I'm going to get a bite to eat, and then I'll head straight home and I'll be there in a few hours," Bryce said. About an hour after getting off the phone with Bryce, Karen would receive a call from Christian. He was returning one of her calls, he had just gotten off of work. He asked if Bryce had made it home safely, and Karen would tell him no, that Bryce still hasn't made it home actually, and she kinda explained everything that's happened since they last spoke. So Christian offered Karen to take a ride past the hotel just to make sure that Bryce really left. But Karen said, "No, you've already been so kind, don't worry about it, I'm sure he's long gone and on his way home." Christian says okay and wishes Karen the best, and then they hung up. But, after hanging up the phone, Christian knows he don't have to, but at this point he just feels too invested in the situation, so he figures he'll just drive past the hotel anyways just to be sure. As he pulls up to the hotel, the last thing he's expecting to see is Bryce. But when he pulls into the parking lot, to his surprise, he sees the 2003 Toyota Highlander with Bryce just sitting there staring forward out the front of his car. So Christian pulls his car next to Bryce, he hops out and gets Bryce's attention and tells him to roll down his window. Bryce, a little caught off guard, rolls down his window and Christian tells him, "Hey, you really need to go home, your parents are worried sick. Matter of fact, you're going to leave, and I'm going to follow you out until you get on the freeway. Just to make sure you're headed back home." Reluctantly, Bryce agrees, and that's exactly what they do. And for the next hour or so, Christian would follow behind Bryce to make sure he kept driving towards home. And in the meantime, Christian would give Karen a call to let her know, "Your son had never left, I found him still sitting there in the parking lot, but everything is totally fine now. I talked to him and now I'm following him down the highway to make sure he's headed home this time." Karen, upset, but also relieved to know that her son is actually on his way home this time, thanked Christian for all his help. Then she lets him know that she will let him know as soon as Bryce walks through their door. He tells her she's welcome, and that he was happy he could help, and wishes Karen the best of luck, and then they hang up. After hanging up with Karen, Christian would take the next exit and head back to Buttonwillow. Soon after their phone call, Karen would call Bryce and tell him that she wanted him to start giving her landmarks so she knew he was actually headed home and not just lying. But every time she would ask for a landmark, or for him to name a sign, or anything he sees, he would make an excuse and say it was too dark, or that he couldn't see anything out his windows. Then at about 2 a.m., Bryce said, "You know what, Mom, I think I'm going to pull over and take a nap. I'm too tired to keep driving." But Karen and Mike were totally against it. They said, "No, you're almost home, just keep driving, and when you get here you can sleep as much as you want." And Bryce said, "No, I'm too tired." And Karen and Mike thought about it, and that's when they realized that Bryce had been up for almost 24 hours straight already, and that he probably was really tired, and maybe it would be a good idea for him to pull over and take a nap. So, Karen told him, "Go ahead, pull over and nap, but as soon as you wake up, you drive straight here." Bryce said, "Of course, that's fine," and that he will see them in a couple of hours before hanging up the phone. Just a few hours later, at 8 a.m., Karen and Mike still haven't heard back from Bryce, but they figure it's because he's still sleeping. He must just be totally exhausted from being up so long. And then they hear their doorbell ring. They immediately get excited, saying finally, thinking that it has to be Bryce. They rush to answer the door, so they hurry and open the door, and instead of their son, it's a police officer, and the officer asks them if they own a 2003 Toyota Highlander. And Karen and Mike nervously say yes, that's our son's car, is everything okay? And the officer replies, "Well, a couple hours ago we located the vehicle at the bottom of a 25-foot cliff near Castaic Lake." Castaic Lake is about half the distance between Buttonwillow and where Karen and Mike live. The police said the car was found empty, and there was no sign of a driver, but they did however find 2 small drops of blood inside the car, but other than that, there was no sign that Bryce was injured. But the cops did mention that the back window had been broken out from the inside of the car, so they suspect that Bryce broke the back window out to exit the vehicle. Inside the vehicle, detectives would find Bryce's cell phone and laptop, and right outside the vehicle in the middle of the road was his wallet and his duffel bag. Both look like they had been rummaged through. After forensics examined the damage to the car, the tire tracks, and the rest of the wreckage, along with traffic cameras from the area, investigators made the conclusion that they were likely looking at a failed S attempt. Investigators said that after reviewing the traffic cams, that Bryce actually hit his accelerator to speed up right before he intentionally drove off of the cliff. After hearing this, Mike and Karen were absolutely devastated. They just couldn't believe that the son that they dropped off at school, just 2 weeks prior, was the same son that was excited to be at school, and was the same son that was just talking about their future, was the same person that just tried to do such a thing. Karen and Mike were in shock. They couldn't figure out what could have gone so wrong, in such a short amount of time, that could have made their son want to do something like this. It made his parents and investigators both wonder, like, what could Bryce have been hiding that was so big, that was so bad, that made him do something so extreme? And what could Bryce possibly have been talking about when he told his mom that he had a lot to talk about? Like, what was Bryce hiding? Was Bryce running from something, or someone? Well, that conversation never ended up happening, so no one really has any idea what it could have even been about, even though most believe it to be the reasoning behind Bryce's strange behaviors. Immediately after finding the wreckage, a huge search was launched around where the car was found. With hundreds of people, they searched on horseback, and on ATVs, and on foot. They used helicopters to search by air. They used divers to search the entire lake. They searched absolutely everywhere remotely close to the wreckage area for weeks and weeks to no avail. On the 9th day of the search, they brought a bloodhound to see if they could pick up a scent. And sure enough, the hound would pick up Bryce's scent quite easily. The hound would pick up his scent around the crash site, that led from the crash site down to the lake, and then the hound followed the scent around the side of the lake to a bridge, then across the bridge to an access road, and the hound would follow the scent to the end of that access road, where the scent would lead them to a truck stop, and it's at that truck stop that the scent would be lost. And the investigators were shocked by the lead they just got from the bloodhound, so, just to be sure, the next day they had another bloodhound come to see if it could pick up his scent again. And wouldn't you know, the bloodhound they brought in the next day picked up his scent and followed it the same exact way to a T. Some say that because of Bryce's drug use, he had a mental breakdown and he really drove off of that cliff on purpose, and his body ended up in the lake and is still in there waiting to be found. And others completely disagree and think without a doubt that Bryce is still alive. They believe that after going off of that cliff, Bryce broke out his back window and crawled out of the car. And then he took whatever he needed out of his duffel bag and wallet and left them both where he was standing and began fleeing the scene. From there he would walk down to the lake, and on and across the bridge, then onto the service road, and then make his way to the truck stop where he would hitch a ride, and is now living a brand new life somewhere off the grid, under a new name and identity. The family believes something entirely different though. Allegedly, Mike and Karen believe that foul play was involved in their son's disappearance. Is it possible that Bryce had gotten himself into some trouble while at school that no one knew about? Could he been sitting in the parking lot of the rest stop in the hotel the night before his disappearance, contemplating his best option? Maybe he was on his way to his parents to ask them for help, but trouble had caught up with him before he made it there. But the fact remains, whatever happened to Bryce after wrecking his car remains a mystery to this day. But those are just a few of the theories that surround the strange and mysterious disappearance of Bryce Laspisa. Maybe someday what happened to him in the early morning hours of that fateful day will finally come to light. But until then, we will just have to let our minds wonder. So, what do you think happened to him? Is it one of the theories we mentioned? Or do you have your own theory on what happened to him? Let us know what you think happened in the comments down below, because we would really like to hear what you think. Thank you so much for sticking around and watching this video through its entirety. Your support truly means the world to me. And if you enjoyed this type of content, don't forget to subscribe, turn on all notifications, and share it with your friends. Remember, your feedback keeps me motivated and helps me create even better content for you, so if you would like to see more videos about the creepy and mysterious, just like this one, then check back in a couple days, because I post new videos once or twice a week. Well, until next time, thank you again, and stay awesome.